So we've been thinking about behaviour and behaviour change, and now I want to move on to talk about what a behavioural approach is. And one of the things really important to understand is that it is a directive approach. It has a sense of direction, and it's based on what we call a patient-centred clinical method. And you'll see a lot of the more recent material refers to person-centred. Sometimes you'll see it as client-centred. It's all basically meaning the same thing. So we've got a directive approach. So when we have a consultation with someone, it's not a kind of free-flowing, let's listen to, you explore what's going on. It's there for a purpose, and it has a structure. And the agenda of the person, the client, the patient, and the practitioner, which will be you, should be an agreed one. So we work together to say, right, what's our sense of direction today? What is it we are going to be focusing on? So what do we mean by this person-centred or patient-centred clinical method? So let's have a think about that. So we most often will be dealing with someone who has a disease or is at risk of a disease. So let's use diabetes for an example. So someone with type 2 diabetes. And we might understand what type 2 diabetes is. We might understand the rules for managing type 2 diabetes. But what we don't know when we go into that consultation is that person's experience of having type 2 diabetes. So their personal illness experience. And we really need to be mindful of that we don't go in with an agenda thinking, oh, well, this is quite simple to manage and we just do this, and we just do that. What's that person actually experiencing in their type 2 diabetes or whatever condition it is? We need to really make sure we understand that person as a whole and not make any assumptions about them, or they're this gender, or they're that ethnicity, or they're that age, therefore they will be. We've got to try and understand that whole person, including their social background, and what might be influencing their illness experience, and what is going to influence their ability to change behaviour. So we really need to be very focused on the individual and understanding them. And within that, we might discover that our idea of what that person should do is a long way from what they think they can do. So you could say, oh, well, you need to do these different things to change your diet, item 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But that person may be only able to cope with 5 and 6, not 1 to 4. So we've got to find the common ground. What is it that we can do to build that link and find the starting place for that person in behaviour change? So we've got to find that common ground. We need to incorporate prevention and health promotion. And what I mean by that is, when we are looking at a person with celiac disease, for example, we might be thinking, right, they need a gluten-free diet. So we need to treat the celiac disease. But what we also need to be mindful of is, well, what's the long-term impact of that celiac disease? Actually, we need to consider their calcium intake. We might need to consider their iron intake. But also, just because they have celiac disease doesn't mean they might not be at risk of diabetes and cardiovascular disease. So our approach needs to consider a very holistic look at their lifestyle and their health journey, as well as just considering the celiac disease. So you will not be just saying, oh, right, this is how you cut out gluten. You will be thinking, well, how is that diet going to remain balanced? How is that going to support that person to live a healthy lifestyle in the long term? A behavioural approach is very much based on the relationship that you build with that person. If you think about it, someone's going to ask you some very personal questions. What's relevant to you? What your living conditions, what kitchen facilities do you have? Where do you shop? Who else are you cooking for? What religion are you? Does that have an impact on your food intake? We're asking some very personal things, and you can only do that and get honest answers if you build a relationship with your patient, and you build a relationship that allows them to trust you enough to tell you what you need to know. So we also need to be realistic. We may start people with 2 or 3 goals towards their aim of treatment, not 15. So we've got to be realistic about what that person can do. And that is very variable depending on the individual. So we've got to really be thinking through this whole idea of patient-centered clinical method, thinking about economic context, their motivation, their skills, other things impacting them. So we need to really focus on those things for a behavioural approach. So the most important part of this is getting to know this individual. And we have to tailor our intervention to meet their needs. So we need to understand their current behaviour, what's going on for them, how they normally eat, how they normally exercise, what else might be influencing their condition, whether they smoke or not, for example. And we come back here to considering things like the capability. What can they do? What can't they do? Is there any way we can influence that? We need to be thinking of their context, which relates to their opportunities that we've talked about already. What opportunities do they have? What don't they have? Their income is going to impact that. Where they live is going to impact that. So we need to be gaining that information about their capability and their context in order to look at their motivation. So we're thinking very broadly about those aspects, and how motivated is someone to change? And that's not something you can just say, well, fill in this questionnaire. Oh, right, you're that motivated, we'll do that. It's about you working to support that person to improve their motivation. It might be they're highly motivated. It might be they're not motivated at all. But within a consultation, you can change that by building that relationship, by working out what someone can do as opposed to what they can't. What do they feel able to tackle at this time? So motivation is not something that is fixed. It is something that will change. And then you've got to really be thinking about the specific needs of the individual. What's impacting on them. And there may be broader aspects of them as a person that's impacting on them. It might be, have they got any specific needs in relation to their religion, their culture, their ethnicity, their sexuality, their gender? What's going to be impacting on that person and what they might do? So all of this is going to require that person-centered approach and good communication skills, which is what this module is going to contain, with a lot of work on developing our communication skills. So we have some guidance. If we're going to be working on a behavioural approach, what are we going to do? What are the principles of that? So these are core to how we work, and these also fit very much with NHS values, so you'll see that coming up as well. Respecting autonomy. So the individual has a right to make a decision. That decision might not be what you think they should do, but they still have a right to decision. So they're involved in the decision-making process. You're not making the decisions for them, unless they happen to be unconscious or not competent to make decisions. You make decisions in their best interest in that situation. The client or the patient has a responsibility. So they are responsible for their own actions. If they make an agreement with you that they are going to change X, Y, and Z, and they go away and don't do it, that's not your responsibility. So we need to try and understand the difficulties they might have in making change and support them as much as possible. But at the end of the day, they have got their responsibility to go away and actually do something. The idea of social influence is that we are employed, you hopefully will be employed by the NHS to make a difference, to influence health behaviour. And that's what our social influence is. We are there with a purpose to support people to make a change. That's what our role is, to make that influence. Collaboration is about incorporating the health agenda of that individual and working together to work out how that agenda can be met. So it's very much working together. That's important with the language that you use. You're finding the patient's understanding of themselves and their skills, their understanding, their abilities, and you're putting that with your expertise to develop a plan together. Self-efficacy is about an individual having that self-belief that it is possible for them to change. And it's really good to just stop and think, what might make that difficult for someone? What might make them think that they have no possibility of making a change? Stop and have a think about that. And the last one here is empowerment. People need to be supported to gain more control over their decision making and action. And that might be really relevant for something like type 2 diabetes, where we encourage people to self-manage. We will encourage people to self-manage their celiac disease, to take control over that, and look after themselves. So we're trying to encourage that at all times. And finally, we need to think about the skills that we need. So in order to be client or person-centered, we need to have certain skills and qualities about us. And those, again, we're going to develop in the module. Firstly, empathy. And that is very different to sympathy. It's not feeling sorry for somebody. It is about trying to put yourself in that person's shoes, trying to walk the journey with them, trying to understand what it's like from their perspective. Genuineness is about being yourself, being self-aware, being sincere, not trying to put up a front, which people can nearly always see through. You really need to be genuinely interested in people, and if you're not, it really shows. Acceptance is sometimes called unconditional positive regard. So what we're looking at is we're respecting people. Again, that's the NHS values. We're being non-judgmental. And that is sometimes challenging when people live their lives in a way that we don't actually agree with. So we need to be really mindful of the prejudices that we have in ourselves. We've all got them, of things that we find difficult, and how that's going to influence how we care for someone. And it shouldn't, is the bottom line. We need to accept people, however unhealthy their lifestyle is, however they live their lives. We still accept them as people worthy of our time and respect. That's something we really need to think about. Compassion, it's caring, it's being concerned for that person in their situation. That's also part of what we call the 6 C's, which is another quite useful document to have a look at. Being compassionate is part of what is expected within nursing professions as well. So, but for all healthcare professionals, we need to be compassionate. We need to care about that individual in front of us. Our non-verbal communication, again, we will look at this. You've got to look interested. You've got to have eye contact with people. You need to think about your body posture. And also have a bit of a think, well, what else is influencing that? What gets in the way of that? What gives us poor non-verbal communication? So we'll become more aware of our non-verbal communication through the course. And finally, the good communication skills, effective communication. Now, you have already got on the course because we think you'll be able to do that, but it's about how you communicate in consultations. So hopefully we'll be learning skills that are going to help you improve in that.